Welcome back to the Biblical Conservative channel. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited about our guest. We have Adam B. Coleman. This man's a busy man. He is the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. He's an author, he's a writer. You've probably seen him on Sky News doing some interviews and those kind of things. He freelances with the New York Post. He has a lot of things going on. He's written a book from victim to victor, and some other things he's written recently. So buckle up, get ready for an exciting conversation, and let's welcome in Adam.
Appreciate it.
Hey Adam, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I was very. We were just talking before. It was such a coincidence because I discovered your channel maybe like a month ago now, maybe a little bit less. And here you reach out to me and invite me on, so I do appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. I mean, we have a lot of things that we kind of flow in the same lane a little bit. So when I saw your post, because you have a great Substack, so I'll be sure to put all that in the description as well for my audience to check that out because it's important to have, especially as Black men. Let's start off right there. It's
Mhm.
important for us to provide a different alternative because most of the time we get this stereotypical mainstream stereotype that they put on Black people, especially Black men. So it's good to have Black
Right.
men show that there's alternatives to the way that the system kind of wants you to live. So it's always good to come across brothers like that. So
No,
um
I appreciate that.
yeah. So my first question is, before we even get into some of the work you've done, take us through like your journey. How did you get to where you are today? What are some like key milestones, key things that you look back on your life that's like, wow, this is what has led me and propelled me to where I am today?
So yeah, I'm assuming you mean kind of like professionally,
Yeah,
right? How did I end
professionally,
up
personally, yeah,
writing? Okay.
professionally, yeah.
Okay. Because I feel like my life is, it's like all over the place. So I'll
Yeah.
just start with the most obvious of how did I end up writing a book and writing for New York Post. So actually, most people who are writers, the book comes later. But for me, it was the opposite. I wanted to write a book. Um, I was a IT professional. I was the IT manager for a small business at the time. Um, and in 2019, I had an idea about writing a book. I think I sat down for like 30 minutes and wrote something and never came back to it. All I knew is I wanted to write something about questioning things because I was kind of having like this personal transformation and realization about life. And I wanted to create some sort of like legacy for my son, something for my son to be proud of and to remember. So I figured like a book, would be a good thing. So it wasn't with the idea like, oh, this would spawn into this. I just wanted to write a book. That was basically it. Um, and then 2020 happens. Obviously, the pandemic left everybody indoors. And then George Floyd happens. And then everything becomes about black this, black that, and all these weird narratives that I'm watching on television where everybody's repeating, like, this is how it's always been. And yes, this, of course, we're all oppressed. And it's just like, where did all this stuff, like, I've seen it before. So it's not like it's foreign. And, and obviously, like, if you're around, certain educated people, or if you're around certain black people, you see the pro blacks and they talk a particular way and you see it, right? But it was never mainstream. And all of a sudden, it was like the next day, mainstream pro-black leftists became the became the talking point, became the voice of America, basically, the voice of Black America. And and so for me, it was kind of like, these people don't represent me, but also I felt like, am I crazy? Like there was that moment, like, am I the only one that feels this way? Because it feels like I'm going crazy here. And I went online and looked for like free speech forums and was talking to people. And I realized, all right, one, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person who feels this way. There's a lot of people who feel this way. It's just a very high emotional time. But in the meantime, we have these particular people who are speaking for me. And even to be 100% fair, like, and how I'm judging, it's not just that they were left. This is how they were talking about it. It's what they're implying. And there were some people who I generally, I would say, mostly agree with what they're saying, but I didn't like how they were saying it. Um, so I was like, the only person who's going to say what I think is me. And it just hit me. Well, not just hit me. I would say that going on these free speech forums was incredibly beneficial because people were pushing me into that direction, and I didn't even see the direction I was going to go towards. They were saying you need to write more because I wrote like in long form of how I felt, and they were like, how you explained yourself is really good. You need to write more. And there was one particular pastor, I believe he was out in Illinois or Indiana, I can't remember which one, but he had reached out to me a couple times, and he was encouraging me to write. And keep in mind, I wasn't a Christian at the time. I was
Hmm.
someone who was coming from being agnostic to realizing that there is a God, but I was still on that path. And especially like for people like a pastor to reach out to me, say like you need to go down this path, you need to keep going. So that was like I think this is the book I wanted to write. And so from there, I didn't really tell anybody. I think and there's a whole story when it comes to my now wife, but we were dating at the time. Um, and she encouraged it. Um, so she supported me every day. I would sit down and write. I would send her what I wrote, and she would encourage me. She would read every single thing I wrote. She actually ended up helping me edit it at the end. That's how much support. Find yourself a good woman who supports you.
For real. Yes, I have one. Trust me, it comes in handy.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, she supported me, and there were probably two other people that that actively knew, and I even like sent them samples of what I was writing. Um, but I didn't tell anybody because I just wanted to focus on writing and express myself. There are things like I criticize my mother, but in a not in an antagonistic way. I'm just criticizing certain things. I criticize myself. I criticize my father, who passed away years ago. So like I'm being critical, and I didn't want someone to say, no, 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 you shouldn't. No, don't. Like I didn't want any of that. I also didn't tell my job. So you can imagine writing about race in the midst of George Floyd. Like, am I going to get fired or what? But I didn't care because I felt like oh, this is something I'm supposed to do. Um, and so I wrote it. I self-published, and I told my job. Turns out the owner of the company is like a big Trump fan. He bought like 5 copies for his socialist kids. You know how that works.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, it was just a venture of one, expressing myself, two, dedicating something for my son, um, and have my son read and understand his father a little bit more. Um, where I was coming from, things like that. And then basically from there, I just reached out to some podcasts and was saying, "Hey, you want to hear what I have to say?"
yeah,
They said, "Sure." In the midst of like, I think it was 2021. Sure, we'll talk to you about it. And and then it was just like one opportunity just led into another. And then I got on Twitter, and I was like, ah, this is going to be such a waste of time. And turns out Twitter has been like the best thing for my career. So, um, so many wonderful people, so many opportunities. I got connected with Newsweek. I became friends with the editor of Newsweek, and ultimately, that's what led me into the New York Post. Because it was an article I wrote for Newsweek, they couldn't use it, so she was like, "Oh, just send it to New York Post," and then sent it over. And 24 hours later, she's like, "It's going in." Oh my god! So
yeah,
yeah, like literally, not everything that I've been able to accomplish has been purely by chance. Like
yeah,
I didn't plan it. It wasn't something I sought to do. It was just like, well, there's an opportunity here. I'm just saying yes. I'm just taking it. Um, and it's been an incredible ride. And I've been writing for the New York Post. I want to say over 2 years now,
yeah.
um, which is incredible because, and I'll shut up after
No,
this. But
no,
like, I
no.
I remember talking to someone who knew I was like writing stuff. I think this was just before I published the book, so she kind of knew that I was writing something, and she was like, "You should write for the New York Post." I was like, "They would never have me." And then here we go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, you
That's a
never
great
know.
story, man. That reminds me. I mean, we all have similar stories like that. That's how I started this channel. You get a sense that God wants you to do something, that the Lord wants you to speak, especially when
Yeah.
you are speaking what I believe is truth. And a lot of people, there is a vacuum essentially to me when it comes to like biblical truth nowadays. I mean, people have all kinds of things that they call as truth, but it's really not. It's their opinion, and they try to push their opinion on you to make you accept it instead of really just sitting down having a conversation like you and I are having.
Mhm.
And I really just believe that God has a way of placing people at particular times that may not, because I'm similar to you. My journey is very similar. I come from like a IT kind of background, a data background. So I have a background in data. It's something about data people and IT people. We think differently, and we tend to
Yeah.
sometimes, like to buck the trend. We're always trying to find that solution to a problem, right? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of the things that I think of as well. So take me through. So I know you said you were agnostic when you
Mm.
started this journey. How did you come to I assume you're Christian now, right? That's based upon
Yes.
everything I read. So how did you get from being an agnostic to being a Christian?
Yeah, I was just to also put something on it. I was baptized this year.
Oh,
Um,
praise God.
it was something that was in the it was something that was in play where I was trying to figure out. I wanted to get baptized for almost a year, but I didn't know where to get baptized at. I wasn't part of a church. I'm still not part of a church as of yet. So like I didn't know where I wanted to do it, and I also wanted my family to be there, but my family moved to Atlanta. Um, I would say like my mother's in Atlanta, my sister's in Atlanta, my nephews. So and I have an uncle down there as well. So like my family doesn't live where I live at, and I didn't want to like just get baptized. I wanted to get baptized in front of people. Like I wanted to bear witness in front of people, and also obviously in front of God. So coincidentally, I started working with someone who was based in Atlanta, and um, she's a ordained minister, and she also has a friend who is a pastor. And we started working together. And then I was just like, let me just ask her. So I asked her, I was like, do you mind baptizing me? She was like, yes. And I have somebody who will conduct it as well. So we, it was just like, yeah, like all of this everything just made sense. Like I felt urged to ask her, and she was like, yes, of course. So much so, like, after the baptism, we went to her place and we hosted a get together with my family. So my family was there to see me take that leap, and be there to bear witness to me making a promise to God, and becoming a faithful Christian man. So yeah, it was. That's just like the very end. But how I got here? Um, it's obviously it's not just like one thing.
Hmm.
I would say there's a couple of pivotal points. So one, I grew up without my father, and so in many ways, like I am someone who suffered from abandonment. Like that's just the plain way of looking at it. And when you're a child and you faintly understand God or the existence of God, there is a bit of like, am I being abandoned by God too? That kind of mentality, because you don't know what His presence looks like, and how it feels, and so like I was never obviously an atheist where I was certain that he didn't exist, but I just wasn't sure. Like I was open to it. um I had an experience with evil. It was one particular night. um I woke up, I think it was around 3 a.m., and I had like some history of like bad dreams of getting attacked and stuff like that, and like waking up in fright, like literally shouting out of my sleep. um But this wasn't it. Like I remember waking up calmly and looking around, and I remember my room looked darker than normal. And I felt like something was there. And I heard something in my ear say my name in a long drawn out way. Like it was an audible voice. And I said, "What the?" I
Yeah.
jumped out of bed, and I turned on the lights and looking around, and nothing is in my room. And like it just felt evil. Like there was a
Yeah.
sense like
Hmm.
this ain't right. And so I didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell anybody that. Coincidentally, not long after that, I started dating this woman. Um, Things were going fine. I was at her place and I heard her yell, "Stop that." And I was like, "What? What is going on?" Like she was in the bathroom yelling. So I was like, "You talking to me?" She's like, "No." And I was like, "Who are you talking to then?" She's not on the phone or anything.
Yeah.
And so it took a little bit, but she finally admitted that she had been hearing voices since she was a little girl of people who had either passed or something from the other side. And so she has to sometimes tell it to stop because they'll keep going. I'm like, "Do
Hmm.
you see it?" She's like, "Oh no, I don't, thank God I don't see anything." But she hears it, and it's something that she's experienced since she was a little kid. So obviously, like when you hear that, you're like, "Nah, I don't know, are you crazy or not?" But then she looked at me like dead serious, and she was like, "Adam, I know you're not a believer, but because of that, you're easier to attack. And before you go to bed, you need to pray to God." And I was like, like she knew something was going, like I was vulnerable. And which was also a coincidence because around that time, like I just felt I moved to a different place and I just felt uneasy, at my place. And just I couldn't put my finger on it. So after that, that night I went home. Before I went to bed, I prayed and I slept really good. Like I didn't wake up in the middle of the night. I just slept like peacefully. And I did that especially like for like the next couple weeks where I prayed every night. And so like excuse me, my voice.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing that like opened me up and like I think there's something more here. Um and mind you, like the stuff that I'm telling you is probably like a year span, maybe like less than a year. Around that same time, my grand aunt, who was like my grandmother, my actual grandmother died when I was a little kid. But then I had my grandfather's sister. I believe, yeah, grandfather's sister. She was like my grandmother. We would go and see her for Thanksgiving, always warm. And, just like with anything else, as you get older, they get older. And I found out that she was coming out of hospice and they were saying like she might be gone in a couple days. And I drove over to Massachusetts. She was sedated, or I don't know if she was sedated, but she was asleep. She was out. And I saw her when she woke up and she was just screaming in agony. And like she was in pain. I went and tried to touch her, hold her hand. She's just looking at me. She doesn't know who I am. Like just a completely different person. And it was so traumatizing for me to see her like that. Cause she was someone who had just like joy, always laughing. Even when she had like the oxygen tank, she was always laughing. And to see her in that much pain. So I drove home that night because I was like, I can't. The next morning, she had passed. She had passed
Mm.
overnight. So, like, that was really, really tough. It's hard for me to tell the story without
Yeah.
crying, sorry.
Yeah. No,
Um,
it's all right.
Fast forward, the funeral. The funeral's happening. My cousin asked me to be a pallbearer. Um, I'm a typical guy. I don't like crying in front of people, and obviously this is a perfect opportunity to cry, but I'm just like I'm trying to hold it in. I'm wiping my tears, looking away and stuff like that. My cousin, he's a pastor, and he's conducting the funeral at the church. So then we leave and it's time for us to go to the grave site. And I'm driving there and in my head I'm like, after this I'm just going to drive home by myself. Like I'm just and just mourn by myself and just cry all the way home. And they say a couple words. It's now time for me to go over and lift her casket. I swear, as soon as I put my hand on that casket, immediately all my tears went away, and I knew for certain that she was fine. Like it was just an instant knowing that she was fine. From that moment, I didn't cry at all. Like it just whatever was built up here was gone. And it wasn't like, oh, this is wishful thinking. and it was like something came over me, and I knew for certain that she was fine. Um, and so like that ended up being the best day because it was like it was family I hadn't seen in years, and actually Black Panther the movie, the first one came out. We all went to see the Black
Yeah.
Panther, my cousins and uncle, and we had such a good time, and we were celebrating life at her home, and that's exactly what she would have wanted. And like that was like a massive, massive blessing. And I'm trying not to cry.
No, no.
Uh,
No, I hear what you're saying.
um,
That's man, that's touching. That's one of those things. And yeah, I was close to my grandmother as well. Similar situation. My dad left when I was 8 years old, so I definitely know what you mean by having that sense of abandonment when all your friends have their fathers around and your dad's not around, and especially
yeah,
you because as a young boy, you always want that approval, that affirmation, from your dad.
yeah,
And one of those things, and that's one of those things that I had to get as I became more mature in Christ. You start to realize that God is a better father than any human father could ever be. And so that's one of those
yeah,
things that gave me that assurance, that that confidence to release. Because I mean, you probably had to do the same thing. My dad passed
yeah,
away last year, and so
mm,
my dad left, like I said, when I was 8, and it's one of those deals. We still had a relationship, but it's not the relationship that you want. You want to be able
mm,
to go hang out with your dad. You want to be able to do things with your dad, and I didn't do that. And especially as a boy coming up in your formative years with a single mom, it's tough. All those things that you are exposed to, that a father should protect the children from. You get exposed to it and you kind of fall into
yeah,
that. I just thank the grace of God that He protected me and kept me, because you deal with that. You deal with that hurt. You deal with that pain. And that's a lot of the issues that the Black community is dealing with the fatherlessness, because, young boys are hurt. And there's two ways I
mhm,
found that you deal with it. You either join a gang, you take somebody's life, you shoot somebody, or you objectify women and you go down that path. I mean, that's usually the two paths I've seen that young boys end up following. So I definitely understand what you mean by that. And even when it comes to, you're talking about your experience you had in your room. I mean, I've had a similar experience where before I became saved, really. I mean, I was religious, but I wasn't really like saved. So you have somebody, you feel that paralysis, like somebody's on top of you, but you can't move, you can't
right,
speak, you can't do anything at all. So I mean, I tell people all the time, look, the spirit world's real, man. I mean, people may deny it, they may say it's not, but just look at all the craziness that goes on in our country and our community. You got to know something else is
mhm,
going on that's driving people to act the way that they act. So so yeah, I definitely know what you mean by that. For sure. For sure. So let me ask you this, because this is one of the things that kind of helped me when I didn't have my dad around. Were there any men that were like mentors or father figures that kind of helped you along the really? Nobody. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, so and just to add a little bit more background, um, I would see my father maybe once, twice a year after we moved. So I was born in Detroit. My father lived in Detroit. We left, I want to say I was about the age of 4. I would see him, he would come over. I don't, obviously, I was very young, so I don't remember how frequently, these are things I talked to my mom about just to get clarification. But my mom indicated like he would come over semi frequently. I don't know if it was like once every 2 weeks or something like that. The issue was always that my father was married, just not to my mom. So we were the other kids. Matter of fact, he never had children with his wife. I actually found that out recently. Um, so like he would come over to see us and see my mother, obviously. Um, so it was a very like weird situation. We moved from Detroit, and basically after that, I would see my father um, once a year, maybe sometimes twice a year, especially when we lived in New York and New Jersey. Um, my father was a tailor, so he would sometimes drive from Detroit to New York City to get fabrics. So that's when I would see him. But outside of that, I didn't see him. Like, I would talk to him on the phone probably about the same amount of times, once or twice. They were always short. My father was essentially a stranger. Um, like, I didn't really know anything about him. My father never gave me any sort of wisdom, a talk, or anything like that. Um, so I always felt disconnected from him, growing up as a kid. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, my mother never got remarried, or not remarried. She never got married.
Yeah.
Um, she rarely had any sort of boyfriends. If she did, it was very short lived, or kind of at a distance. Um, so I never really had a male influence in my life, probably until I was an adult. Um, you know, there was one person that she was, I would say, sort of dating. Um, he was very nice. He was also in the IT field. Um, and he's probably the closest, I would say, to being some sort of a figure, but at very much so at a distance. Like, he would occasionally help me out for something, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
but never on a deep personal level, like you would even like a stepfather, but you would see them all the time or talk to them.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned you grew up in Detroit. Yeah, most of my family is in the Detroit area, Pontiac. So that's where I was
Okay.
last year to bury my dad. So yeah, very familiar with the area as
Mm.
well. So wow. So take me back to the summer of 2020. So you've starting to
Yeah.
write, you're starting to see everything that's going on in the country. You start to see the push for racial reconciliation that everybody was pushing at the time, from churches to the media. You got corporate America,
Mhm.
everybody's putting their black square around their little avatar on social media. So after you have written your book and you've published it, what was some of the feedback that you got from your family? Like what were some of the responses that they had for your book?
It's I'm very blessed because you hear a lot of bad stories. Family members don't want to talk to you and stuff like that. Even my family members who disagree, or they think they disagree, because there's a lot of that where they think you're saying something you didn't really say. They still support me. My Like, the best example I can give you is my cousin. My cousin, I would say he's an independent, but he is more left leaning, but he can see the BS on both.
Yeah,
Like, he's kind of that kind of person. He's a pastor, and he's he's down in Florida. So I got invited by the DeSantis campaign to go to his inauguration. Um, Go in like VIP and all that. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll go down there. So I wasn't sure who I was going to take. So I happened to talk to him, and he's down in Florida, but he lives um, somewhere like kind of farther away from Tallahassee. I was like, yeah, I'm supposed to go to this event in Florida for the DeSantis inauguration, and he was like, I'm coming with you. So I was like, "All right." Like, I technically didn't even invite him, but he's like, "I'm coming with you. We
yeah,
doing this." I'm like, "Okay." So I got an Airbnb. He drove in. Obviously, he lives down there, so he doesn't need to stay with me. But he drove in. We changed at my Airbnb. Went in with tuxes, or not. We like nice suits.
yeah,
I don't think, did I get a tux? I think maybe I did. Uh, yeah, get a tux, and we went to this thing. It's basically like a ball.
yeah.
Everyone's dressed down. We're in the VIP with donors and influencers and some famous people. And he's like, "Man, my cousin made it!" Like, he's like, "My cousin famous."
Yeah.
He's like, "You." He's like, "You know who I just talked to in the bathroom?" Like,
Yeah,
I love my cousin,
yeah,
and my cousin, he's like, I don't really necessarily agree with certain things. You say some things and I'm not even sure about, but I love you. This man, because I wrote the book in 2021.
mhm,
I got married later that year. He married my wife and I. He came all the way from Florida to New Jersey, and he did that for me. And like, so that's why I say, like, he's just one of many. Like, I'm about to go to see my family in Massachusetts in a few days for Thanksgiving. as tradition. I'm bringing my wife, my mother-in-law, and they're all supportive, all of them. And they're like, let us know how we can support. They're very much so like that.
Yeah.
And we don't even like necessarily get into political discussion. And I feel weird doing that with my
Yeah.
family. But they know what I'm up to, and they're so happy for me. Um, and that's like I've been incredibly blessed. My mom, she follows my Substack. you know,
Yeah.
um, and actually, I'm pretty lucky because I know a lot of people who have parents who are very political. My mom has always been like not political, and so she's kind of open where she's like, she'll ask me a question like, "Who's this Vivek guy? What is he about?" and I'll talk to her about it. She's
Yeah.
asking me because I interviewed with him,
Right.
and she's asking me these questions. So she's open, so I can have this dialogue with my mother because she's open.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's been but the situation with my family has been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
My wife, when we met, she was what she would even call a default Democrat.
Hmm.
Um, and and I was leaving the left,
Yeah.
and I was becoming an independent, and I was talking to her and discussing things. Um, quick story, I discovered Larry Elder, and he was saying some interesting things. So
Yeah.
I was like, "Hey, check him out." Now we had just been dating for like maybe a month or so, and she was like, "Oh no, I don't know how this is gonna work." But they say love conquers all.
Yeah.
So and we don't one thing she respects about me, and this is with anybody, I don't force people to do anything. I don't force you to believe or like anything I say. I just want to talk to you. So our and her changing her mind on certain things was just us talking. I never tried to debate my wife. I never tried to say you're wrong. I just talked to her just like I talk to anybody else.
Yeah.
And she's changed her mind on things, and I've changed my mind on things, and we understand. Like we used to watch Kevin Samuels when he was alive, and
Hmm.
we would sit there and pause. And she like, hold on a second. And then we sit there and talk for an hour. Like, so our relationship has always been predicated on us having conversations about things. So I guess to summarize, I've been very fortunate to
Yeah.
have supportive family because I know there's some people who struggle with that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've had a somewhat similar journey. Because on my channel I do, but I always tell people I come from a biblical standpoint. I mean, I don't. I
Mhm,
guess you would consider me. I guess I call myself a biblical conservative. I really don't consider myself a Republican or a Democrat. I'm
mhm.
more independent than anything. So I don't. Even though people like to label me and probably label you as a Republican, I mean, I'm more so just conservative with a biblical viewpoint on things. And so you tend to have people that question, and some people at first are like, have you lost your mind or anything like that? What's going on with you? But but for the most part, it's good. And I try not to talk about politics with family. I mean, I really don't want to talk about that stuff because at the end of the day, your political leaning shouldn't affect how we relate to one another as family. And I know the crazy thing, I'm seeing all these videos of different people. We got folks like Joy Reid interviewing a professor saying that you need to separate from your family if they voted for Donald Trump and all kind of crazy stuff. And that stuff is real because you do have certain people that will distance themselves from family because they chose to vote a different way. And I really can't follow that because even back when Biden won 4 years ago, I wasn't saying, "Oh, I'm gonna distance myself from my family because they voted for Joe Biden." No, most black people vote Democrat, so you're gonna have to be
Right.
around people that vote for the Democratic Party regardless. So so you can't distance
Right.
yourself from your family. But it's just crazy. I know you wrote a piece about that. What are your thoughts about how some people are just really taking this thing, and I think it's one of those things I want to touch on too. I,
Mhm.
I know it happens in other communities, probably to a lesser extent, but in the black community in particular, it's as if you decide to think differently, decide to even vote differently, some people want to excommunicate you from the community. It's one of the strangest and disturbing things I've seen throughout my life. So, what do you think about that?
So, all right, I haven't really talked about this, but it's something I talk to certain friends of mine because it might be a taboo thing to kind of say. But I do think that there is a unique insecurity that exists amongst many Black Americans. And I use the word insecurity very specifically because I spent much of my life insecure. So I know what insecure behavior looks like. And if you're secure in yourself and who you are, and let's say you're a Black person, you're proud to be Black, and so on and so forth, then you're secure in yourself. And it doesn't matter if you're not proud to be Black or if you are proud to be Black or who you vote for, what you believe. You're you're fine either way. These things don't interfere with how you move. And so there's a level of security in that. And I think for many Christians, they understand they're going to be in a world where there are people who are believers and non believers, and they have to be secure with their belief system in the absence that they might have to interact with someone who does not believe and does not see the world from a biblical worldview. And you have to deal with that. You can't stomp and rant and rave that you have to talk to someone who doesn't believe in Jesus. Like you can't. Now, you're encouraged to be around this person so that maybe some of your beliefs can rub off on them and open them up, and so they can see where you're coming from. That's a different story. But that's called being secure, right? There's a level of racial insecurity that I see, and I do believe that there are many Black Americans who are insecure about being Black. And it's unfortunate because there's no reason for them to be insecure, but what I watch is insecure behavior. If you say, "Well, I don't do those things, so you can't do those things," that sounds like something an insecure person would say. And insecure people are some of the worst people to be around because you're always having to tiptoe if you're doing the thing or if they're gonna freak out because you're not doing the thing. Like, it's something that is exhausting, and these aren't pleasant people to be around. Even if you want to care about them, they're not pleasant to be around because they tend to lean into victimhood as
Right.
well because they're insecure. um so I do think that's kind of to sort of answer your question as to why they're so hell-bent on everyone doing the same thing,
Hmm.
because they're so scared that, like, the insecurity part also leads into paranoia. I hear this often, and I'm sure you've heard it, where they they state like something negative that's happening is not just a negative thing that's happening, but it's a conspiracy. to, you know, you know what they try to do. They brought drugs into the community and forced crackheads to smoke crack and to abandon their kids,
Right.
and it
Right.
was their plan all along. And it's like, or people made choices and
Yeah.
conscious choices
Yeah.
reacting to the world around them, and they decided to do the same. Like, just because crack is available, I'm sure there's somebody in my neighborhood smokes crack, right? I'm sure I can drive somewhere that has crack. But
Hmm.
just because crack is available doesn't mean that everyone's
Right.
smoking it. People are making choices to smoke crack, right? So it's not a conspiracy if something is available for all types of people to do it. And at the same time, they'll recognize that, well, the demographics smoke crack too and do drugs and get high.
Right.
So where is the conspiracy? Or is it just a conspiracy when you guys do it, and when that like it? When you start to make sense of this entire thing, if it starts to slowly fall apart and you can't take them seriously, which is why you should not listen to insecure people,
Yeah.
because they're coming from a place where it is tainted. The way they see the world, it is tainted that someone is doing something against them. Things aren't right because not because of them, and if you do something that is different, then oh my God, I can't even handle this. Like it's such an emotional roller coaster to be around these types of people. Obviously, we're not talking about all Black people. Like many of my family members are not like this, but I've seen it. And I think this narrative that we are perpetual victims, someone's doing something to us, the white man is doing this and doing that, all it does is make people feel insecure. When people go on and on about colorism, are there people who say like lighter is better and darker is worse? Yeah, those people exist. but all types of people exist. Like,
Right. Right.
like there are murderers that exist. It doesn't mean that you should be worried about getting murdered every day. Like,
Yeah.
all types of people exist in this world, and those few people who are like that doesn't mean that you're ugly because you're dark skinned, or that every black person favors light skinned over dark skin. Like, there's a level of insecurity that comes along with it, because if you are dark skinned, it doesn't matter if the person next to you doesn't like dark skinned people. It doesn't matter. Just in the same way, for me, I am not racist, right? And it doesn't matter if the person next to me likes black people or doesn't like black people. I
Hmm.
wish they would like black people just like all people, but it doesn't hurt my day. I'm not losing sleep because someone out there that exists is racist.
Right.
It doesn't affect me in that way because I'm secure in myself, and that's their problem, not mine. And I'm not hell bent on changing the world so they can accept me. And that's the other problem too. Insecure people want external validation. They constantly want external validation, which is why you get this weird message about um, America is a white supremacist society and it's ran by white supremacists. And then the next sentence is, they need to do this for us. So wait, the white supremacist society is
Yeah.
supposed to do the thing that you want them to do against you, the very people that you say that they hate, and you expect them to do it. Like, this is like, it's a mixed message, and it always leads for them to fail when you have that mentality of being a victim. So what I'm saying is, you should do things in spite of, even if their narrative is true. And America's this white supremacist society. You have two choices: you either leave America and go somewhere else, or you stay here and do things in spite of.
Right.
Or actually, there is a third option. You stay here and you complain and you fail. And many people choose to fail because they are too prideful to see their insecurity and fix their insecurity. And then the next generation comes, and they get told these old fables, and everyone
Hmm.
thinks that slavery happened 2 years ago, and they don't see the progress that has happened since. So yeah,
Right.
that's my
Right.
rant.
Hey, hey, get on that soapbox. I agree with you. And you're right. That insecurity has been internalized, no matter where it came from. And I tend to believe that
Yeah,
there has been some outside catalysts that have propelled a lot of folks in the community to think a certain way, but you didn't have to. That was a choice that you made. That was
right.
a personal choice that you made. And that internalized insecurity has produced that paranoia that some people feel that they just can't trust people that look different than them. But if they really sat back and thought about it, you have the ability to choose your destiny. Nobody else has that control, but they
Yeah.
give that control over to other people and then they sit back and complain about it. And it's one of the most frustrating things when you see that happen on a constant basis, how people just sit back and complain about things that they have the ability to change. You have to make, nobody has forced you to make wrong decisions. Nobody forces you to, have children outside of marriage. Nobody forces you to not follow what I call like the success sequence, to get a degree, get a job, get married, and have children. Nobody forced you to do that. You've made that choice and you allow other people to influence you because, like I say, they benefit off of you struggling because it helps them continue that narrative, that never-ending narrative, that agitation that these activists always push. Like it never ends. I sit back and think, when will black
Mhm.
people ever arrive? You tell us that we're still oppressed. You tell us that we're never going to be free. That's my question. Okay, when are we ever going to arrive? What is it that will signal to you that black folks have made it? Because I thought it was, especially the ones that really get me though, Adam, are the people that claim to be Christians. I mean, the ones
Ah,
that say that they're Christian, but then they say that they are oppressed and they're not free. I'm like, okay, have you read the Bible? Do you read the Bible? Do you believe the Bible that you say you believe? But anyway, I can get on a soapbox on that one too. But I want to go
well,
down.
actually, I,
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was actually going to be something I was going to bring up. I wrote an article, I think probably back in 2021, because it was something I was noticing too. And mind you, this was before I proclaimed Jesus Christ as my savior. I was noticing black Christians acting like they're not black Christians. And so the title of my article is, "Are you black first or Christian first?
Hmm.
Like, which one is it?" Because if you're a Christian first, then your behavior looks completely different. And and this is where like I think there's a distinction between a black church and a church that happens to be predominantly black.
Yep.
And there's this idea that obviously they're not excluding people. If you're white and you show up there, they'll let you in, right? But there's this idea where they're a specific type of Christian, where they're of a um,
Mm-hmm.
historical prevalence, and they're to be seen as different. And us as black Christians, not as Christians, as black Christians, must move this particular way, and it is twisted doctrine to see themselves as victims
Yep.
who happen to be Christians, who happen to be in a church that has a cross at the front, something AME, and and they, and they're
Yeah.
and what they're talking about
Yeah.
and they're portraying is that the black goes before Christian.
Right.
And so, it goes back to, we cannot serve two masters. Which one is it?
Right.
Are we black or are we Christians? Are we Christians who happen to be racially black in a relatively secular society, or are we black Christians, some sort of special anointed class of Christians who are to be who have a particular worldview that is not biblical? Like, which one is it? And I'm finding, especially when you see stuff of these pastors who sell their congregation out to highlight these different politicians. I wrote an article for the New York Post. Um, I think it was in Philadelphia. Invited Joe Biden out there to
Mm-hmm.
stand at the pulpit.
Sure did.
We saw in Atlanta, invited Kamala
Yeah.
out there and
Yeah.
gave her the red carpet treatment. Yes, to be
Yeah.
the first black woman president.
Right, right, and they
Like,
had a whole
like doing all
the
this
whole
stuff.
ceremony was about coming. It happened. I mean, I need to send you these videos. It happened in Detroit. It happened all across the
Yeah,
country. And you're right. It's these, and I call it a perverted strain of Christianity. It's not Christianity because they don't preach the gospel of
yeah,
Christ. They preach this social gospel, black liberation theology stuff, and it taints the
yeah,
people. And the sad thing about it is, you got people that go to these churches every Sunday, every Wednesday, and they think they are worshiping the God of the Bible, but they're not. They're worshiping that God of blackness, and that's why they can respond the way that they respond to certain things. That's why they get so upset at people like you and I who think for ourselves and may have voted for, Trump, and they think that we're the devil and there's something's wrong with us. So it's like, yeah, it's one of those things that's it's not baffling anymore because I've seen it so often, so I can
mhm,
read it. I know where it's coming from, and I know where people are coming from, and so when I encounter people like that, I really have like mercy because I know they're kind of trapped, like you talked about, in that insecurity, and they just don't know how to
mhm.
get out of it because they don't want to branch out and see the truth. They feel more comfortable being a victim than they do being a victor. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for me, I put more ownership on the pastors. I put more ownership on the leadership. And what always happens when I am, and I've criticized, I've written a couple articles about stuff like this. Fannie Willis, who she was exposed to have an adulterous relationship with a married man, goes in front of the congregation and stands at the pulpit, not saying I was wrong, but talking about how she was wronged, right? And because she's a black woman. Now, to be fair to her, she was talking about certain things like her receiving death threats, things like that, which is not good. I don't care if I agree with you or disagree with you, no one should receive death threats. But you can't stand on the pulpit talking about what was done to you and not talk about your behavior that everyone knows about. Like, it's the elephant in the room, and just to skate over it. But what always happens, it happened with Fannie Willis, it happened with Joe Biden, it happened with Kamala Harris. The pastors, either before or after, always validate the reason why they should allow a politician to come here. They always have an excuse. They don't wait till somebody tells them, well, you shouldn't have someone. They always prepared for it because they know they shouldn't do it. They always got some sort of wordplay. Well, in God's house, everyone is welcome to
Mm-hmm.
to speak and to say, like, no, that's not what this is for. They gave a stump speech. Like when Joe Biden came out there, Joe Biden gave a speech. right? A political speech
Yep.
and talking negatively about Donald Trump. Like, I have a problem with that. And to be fair, I would have a problem with that if Trump did that too,
Hmm.
right? So I don't like the church being politicized. I don't like that at all. The church has a particular purpose, right? Now, I mean even more so the church itself. If they were holding something outside of the church, maybe it's a different story. But these people always do it on Sunday, always do it during service. During the This is the time where we should be talking about prayer and gospel and actually learning something and becoming better Christians. They always stick these people in the middle of that. So you have no choice but to listen to them out. It's not like they did it on a Thursday.
Right. Right. Exactly.
you know, then maybe. But no, they always do it on a Sunday. They always do it in the middle of a typical church service. And they do that for a reason because it's not like you said. It's not about the gospel.
Mm.
It's not about the gospel for them.
No, that's why I call them. I gave them a label. I call them church plants. I really do. They're church plants. They're
Yeah.
planting the black community to keep them voting for the Democratic Party. I call them like the paraministry of the Democratic Party because they are. Because it's not like they give equal time to whoever's running against that particular person. There's a certain sect of people that they allow to come into their pulpit every 2 to 4 years to not just come to church. That's one thing. Everybody's welcome in church. Everybody, but to actually let this person come up in your
Right.
pulpit and actually give a speech, to actually preach is one of those things that you know is not right. And like you said, they know it's not right, but they benefit off of it. And so they have built in excuses already to kind of explain it away. And the sad part
Yeah.
about it, though, is that you and I see it, and I'm sure other people see it, but they continue to allow it. And unless anything changes, they're going to continue to do it. You'll see it. You'll see it 2 years from now. You'll see the Congress people running. You'll see the senators running down in Atlanta. You'll have Warnock go to different churches. He'll speak at different churches. You'll have the other senator in Georgia who's running. He'll speak at different churches. Here in North Carolina, you probably have some kind of Democratic senator speaking at different churches here in Charlotte and other places. It happens. Happens every two to
Mhm.
four years. You can predict it like clockwork. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's one of those deals. So speaking of Trump, what do you think about all this uproar over him not having black people on in his cabinet? I know he just announced. What do you think about that?
So this is what I call the black Republican catch 22.
Yeah,
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. They show a picture of a bunch of white Republicans. Look at them. No diversity at all. And
yeah,
then when they find a black Republican, they say, huh, coon.
yeah.
It's like, what do you want?
I know.
There's not enough diversity. Then they get diversity, and
Yeah.
you say, why are they even there? Like, which one is it?
Right.
That's why I don't take these people seriously because they
Yeah.
don't actually care that Trump. This is just a way to attack. And then and this tells you how politically dumb some people are. Then they look at Byron Donalds and ask, why didn't Byron take a position? You haven't been paying attention.
Yeah.
Byron might be the governor of Florida.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Byron
Right.
has been setting himself. Listen, Byron is an impressive political figure.
Hmm.
Byron has been setting himself up to climb. He
Yes.
could be something very, very prestigious.
Right.
He's not going to be the secretary of something. Like
Yeah.
that's
Right.
that's below him.
Right.
He's
Right.
climbing, not going back down. This is like that's why I know that this is all nonsense. Like
Hmm.
these people don't really care
No.
about
No.
are there enough black people under the Trump administration? Because as soon as there is a black person that he does put into a position, they'll call him a coon and Uncle Tom, and
Right. Hmm.
whatever they want to call him. So
Yeah.
yeah, this their accusation means absolutely nothing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me get your thoughts on this. So, I've seen ever
Mhm.
since the election how the liberal media, MSNBC, CNN, their ratings are cratering a little bit. What do you think is
Yeah.
the future prospects of mainstream legacy media, especially on the liberal side of the house? 'Cause I think a lot of people were truly deceived. They really thought that Kamala Harris is going to win and win in a landslide, and then when that did not happen, I think they lost the MSNBCs of the world, lost the trust of the people. Even some liberal folks on YouTube I've saw have lost subscribers too. So what are your thoughts about the future of like liberal media and mainstream media?
That it's going to continue in that direction. It's going to slowly and slowly die. The only reason why these outlets are still alive, is basically because of big pharma.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
there's only a couple of industries that are keeping legacy media networks like MSNBC alive. If I remember correctly, most of their money, or like half of their funding, comes from big pharma corporations, which is why they said nothing about vaccines and potential dangers of vaccines and things like
Hmm.
that. They don't do any exposés. They pretend like everything is fine. You went to kill grandma if you didn't get the vaccine. So there's a reason why, because they're compromised.
Yeah.
Um, I think more and more people are getting their news from alternate sources. They get even if they want to, they get pop ups on their phone telling them what's going on. um, you know, they don't have to tune into CNN to know what's going on. And honestly, the product itself is tired.
Yeah.
Um, there's one particular guy I know who's on CNN, and I've talked to him a couple times, and I admire this guy because I'm like, man, I don't know how you do it, because you're sitting at a table. He's the only Republican at the table. Maybe there might be one other Republican, and there's five leftists who are surrounding him. And the format is everyone yells at each other and talks over each other. And let me tell you, it's a headache. Like no one, it is not an appealing um, thing to witness.
Yeah.
It's much like a boxing match for politics, but no one wants to watch boxing all day. Like even if you like boxing, there's a point where you're like, all right, I've seen enough boxing today.
Right.
Like no one wants to watch that, and you don't take anything away from it.
Right.
Like, you really don't, because it's actually worse. Because at least in a boxing match, you can see who the clear winner is.
Yeah.
But in stuff like this, the person I think won the debate, the next person who disagrees with that person says, "Oh no, they actually won." Like, so it's a pointless um, setup that they have. This constantly just yell at each other for 3 minutes, and then they go to the next thing. And I've done network television.
Yeah.
You have you have basically 3 at max 4 minutes to make an eloquent point. And that's it. It's gone like that.
Yeah.
Um, like I was on Jesse Waters, it was like a month or so ago, and I'm sitting there at the table, they went to me. I swear I was probably there for 2 minutes. Drove drove all the way from New Jersey to New York City to sit
Yeah.
there for 2 minutes
Two
to drive
minutes.
all the way back. Like, it just goes by
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
But that that's the format. So I've kinda learned to just hit the point, because I know they're gonna be like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, all right, now thank you."
Yep.
Like, they're gonna cut me off.
Yeah.
So, but that particular format, um, is losing its steam. People are less and less attracted to it, especially because there is an alternative. It's one thing when podcasting wasn't a thing.
Right.
This is all you got, right? And you just have to put up with it. But if you have a choice, would you rather listen to someone break down something for an hour that, oh, you know what? I didn't know that, and listen to them in long form? Would you rather, like, let's say you like Trump, would you rather listen to Trump give an hour-long interview with Bloomberg breaking down business, or would you rather him sit for an interview with Axios where they show you a 10-minute video of them cutting him off and yelling at him and so on and so forth? Which one would you like? And most people are getting tired of that. The product is stale. The people they bring on are smarmy. Like no one likes it.
Yeah.
These aren't likable people, and it's so evident that they're not likable people. And they're such in their bubble that they can't realize that they're not likable. Like there's no one. Brian Stelter is probably the smarmiest of the smarmy people that went on television. This man went back on CNN as a guest because he got
Right.
fired,
Yep.
went back on and said, everybody's talking about, you know, these things happening, but it's not happening in my neighborhood. And it's just like, how how
Right.
disconnected
Right.
are you? Like I don't live in a poor neighborhood. I live in a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood. Things are nice around here. I don't have city like crime. But I'm not foolish enough to think that every neighborhood is like mine. And because it's not happening here, it's not happening anywhere.
Right.
That sometimes people tell you exactly how they think without even realizing they told you how they think. When he said that, that is truly his worldview.
Yeah.
Is that, well, you know what? When I go outside, the sun shines. And so the sunshine must be happening everywhere. It's like, no, it rains somewhere too, and there's snow somewhere else. Like it's just they're so close-minded. And these are the people who are supposed to be speaking for the American public. That this is so as much as I was telling you before, my plan wasn't to get into media. I just wanted to
Yeah.
write a book. But part of the reason why I was like, I'm gonna keep doing this is because the people who are supposed to be advocating for the American public or supposed to be the voice of the American public are upper class elitists who don't even understand how we think. The idea that they think that the average American, let's say the average white American, walks around and hates black people is absence of the reality that of like I've lived in 5 states. I've lived in neighborhoods where I was one of the very few black people, and I've seen how they interact. I've met plenty of white people. They don't care about like they're not thinking about that. They're going to work. When they show up at work, they have black coworkers. Do they treat them differently? Likely not. Like people are people. Are there racists in the world? Yes. My experience with dealing with racists in America, I can fit on one hand, right? In person. My experience with dealing with racists online who are leftists, well, I have multiple
Yeah.
hands for
Yeah.
that, right? But this just goes to show you this is the mentality of people who are supposed to be representing the American public while at the same time saying that there's something wrong at the core of America. And what I'm trying to say is you guys are misrepresenting Americans, right? And I don't care what color you are, you're misrepresenting Americans. Because I know the, the majority of Americans that I've encountered, whether they just be people I met in passing or have gotten to know as friends, have been wonderful people. There are obviously people who got problems. I've met them too. But the people with problems are like the slim people of the population of people that I've met. And yet these are the people who are supposed to represent us. So for me, like I'm incredibly blessed and thankful that I've been able to have a run of writing for the New York Post um, to give that normal common sense perspective because it is lost
Right.
throughout most of mainstream media. It has been replaced with ideology. It just wholesale elitist ideology, and at the very least, it's been replaced by political partisans,
Hmm.
right? Who can't see, they can't smell their own crap,
Yep.
can't see from their side where their crap is at, and everybody pretends that their crap actually smells like roses, and their crap smells terrible. Like
Yep.
they're not being objective. And what I'm trying to do, the best of my ability, I'm trying to be objective. There might be something where I'm not being objective, right? I'm not perfect, but I'm at least trying to give an honest perspective on what's going on that's not ideological, which is why I will likely for the rest of my life always identify as an independent. And I would gladly vote for a Democrat if it was a common sense Democrat who wasn't trying to tell me that cutting the breasts off of children is a good
Hmm.
thing and unlimited abortions is absolutely wonderful. There's no problem with it. Like I would support that particular person who wanted to actually secure the border, right?
Right.
And actually, one last thing I'll say is what's funny about Trump is that they label this man as a fascist, as some far right wing person, when in reality, if you break him down policy by policy, the man is a Democrat from the 90s.
Right, right, right. That's yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's what I've been trying to tell people. I mean, I wrote something about this back in the summer because people were complaining about the RNC and some of the people that Trump had at the RNC. I was like, look, you people don't get it. Trump is
right,
more so a Clinton JFK Democrat. That's what Trump is. Trump is a JFK. Trump is what JFK would have been if JFK was still alive and was running today. That's who Trump is.
right,
And people still, I think they're getting it now, but people still didn't get that. And I think they're starting to understand that. And that's why he had so much of a broad appeal this past election, because he was running against somebody who was a socialist, a communist, and a Marxist. So people are like, I don't want that. I don't agree with having boys, yeah, boys playing against girls in sports, with men going to women's restaurants. I don't agree with that. That's crazy. And so
Right.
whenever you have somebody that has some sense of normalcy against somebody that's crazy, then the person that's somewhat normal is going to win. And that's exactly what happened. I think another thing too, and I know you touched on this as well. I think what Trump tapped into is this attack that has been on men, this ongoing attack on straight men for the
Mhm.
last probably decades. And so there's a lot of young men, especially, that are discontented with how they're portrayed in society. So I think Trump was smart in how he tapped into that, and he utilized that to his advantage, so much so that now you got athletes doing Trump dances and all this kind of stuff. So what do you think about how he's tapped into like that hidden element of masculinity that was dormant for so long?
Well, I don't know if it was necessarily purposeful. I just think that there are elements of masculinity that he just is. Like, whether you like Trump or not, you can't accuse him of being fake,
Right.
right? The man has been the man. I was watching an old episode when he was on The View, when they used to invite him on The View. Um, and he saying the same exact thing that he's saying today, acting the same exact way. The man has been consistent for decades.
Right.
And many of the things about the same topics, like we should stop allowing China to rule everything and taking all of our stuff. Like he was talking about the same stuff decades ago. Um, so I think his behavior of not being apologetic for apologetic's sake is a masculine trait. Of him having supreme confidence in himself is a masculine trait. And I think that is something that is attractive, not just for men, but even for certain women, where they like to see a strong man, not a strong man as in like an authoritarian, misconstrue what I'm saying, but like just a strong male figure who does these particular things. Now, it doesn't mean that he has his weaknesses, for
Right.
sure,
Right.
just like
He
every
does.
person has
Yeah.
weaknesses, right? Um, but he he is very I think people underestimate how intelligent he is about certain things and how he has learned from certain mistakes that he has made. Um, it tells me a lot about people who harp on him having bankruptcies when these are also the same people who have never created anything, never created a job for someone, never created a job for themselves, never let someone else, never risked um, their net worth to gain something, to build something. It's never done anything. It's never took some sort of risk. They've always, and that is perfectly fine, worked a normal, typical job, worked a 9 to 5, and came home and didn't have to worry about anything. And guess what? If they lost their job, they would find another one, right? So they've never been in a position where they had to risk it. And for them to criticize someone like him who has risked it and it didn't work out, and he's had some bankruptcies because it's a smart thing to do, so he can leverage and do something else and have it work out. Like they don't understand that. I think that's kind of like that's a lack of education in our country, but also I think that's the socialist mentality where it's the same thing during COVID where they're like, just stay home and everybody will stay at home. Well, how do you think that food makes it to your house?
Right. Right.
Oh, I just call DoorDash and they just
Yeah.
bring it. No, no, no. There's a process. And those people who go through that entire process can't stay at home. like,
Right.
like the
Exactly.
farmer can't work from home on his laptop to
Yeah.
create the food that you eat.
Right.
It's a lack of understanding of how things actually work, the process for it to work. The reason you have that job is because someone took their money and invested it to create a job for them to even pay you. They
Right.
had to risk something and it worked out, which is why you came 10 years afterwards to reap the rewards of their risk.
Right.
And so when they say, well, how come they pay themselves so much? Because They have the risk. You don't, right? That's the reward, right? If it works out, they get paid handsomely. If it doesn't work out, they lose everything. We can talk about how many people have leveraged their own homes for a business, and if that business doesn't work out, they lose the place that they live, right?
Right.
That's someone who's willing to take that risk, being criticized by someone who has never taken a risk in their life.
Yep.
Um, so the completely different mindset. But I kind of veered away from the masculinity part. But I just there is something about taking risks that is very a manly thing to do. And I've taken many risks in my life. Many of the risks I've taken was because I was trying to do something for the benefit of my son. Um, because it's easy to be safe when it's just you, but maybe safety keeps you back, but you need to take that risk if you're going to find something much better. And so, like, having my son at the age of 21 was, looking back, was the best thing that happened to me because it forced me to not think about myself and to actually go out there and do something and not stay at this dead end job that I was at, and
Mm.
to try to strive for something. Like, I need to make a change, and this may work and may not work. And I've done stuff and it didn't work, but I still kept going. Um, and to ultimately end up where I'm at. And I don't regret anything.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, that's one of the things you're right. Inherent within men is that risk taking. You're right. We want to be providers, protectors. That's what we're called to do. And so I think it is
Yeah.
appealing when you see somebody who demonstrates that at the national level. I think that is appealing to a number of men, especially in this day and age when unfortunately, a lot of men don't demonstrate that. Or if they do it, they try to apologize for it. No, I stand
Yeah.
on, biblical masculinity. You're supposed to be strong, but strong in a servant mindset. You serve your family. Like, I agree with you. You take risk for your family. Man, I was thinking about it today. Like, I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way. You will give your life for your family, and that's what a real man does.
Uh,
You give your life for your family. So, I got a few more questions for you. So,
yeah.
what has been the most eye opening thing that you have experienced since you started writing, especially like writing for the New York Post and kind of walking in those circles with like the mainstream media and the pundits and those kind of people? What's been like the most eye opening thing that you never thought was there until you started doing this?
Um, I think one of the it's hard for me to pinpoint the most eye-opening thing, but I
Hmm.
think one of the things I didn't realize until I started doing this is how small the circle is. When you're outside of it, it seems like, man, there's so many people and it's so big, whether it be pundits, politicians, and stuff like that. It seems very big. But when you're in this circle, you realize that it's actually pretty small, and that, like, you're one or two people removed from whoever, right? And it's definitely something that people never get to experience and never understand. I think the other thing too is, the eye-opening thing is the benefit of access. And what I mean by that is, most people, for them to find out what's going on, they turn on the TV, they scroll through social media, they read some post written by somebody and stuff like that. So everything is at a distance, right? And that's normal, right? Obviously, we can't call up Donald Trump and ask him what he thinks about this. Most people, the vast majority of people, cannot do that, right? They don't have access to do that. I remember there were a couple things coming out of Florida, and I just messaged the press secretary for Ron DeSantis, and I said, "Hey, this is coming out. Is this true?" And they were like, "No, it's not true. Here are the sources." I'm like, "Cool. I have access to this person, and most people don't. Like, if most people send that person a message, they wouldn't respond. They're busy. But I have access to them. I know who they are. They know who I am, and we respect each other. Um, I've gotten to meet Vivek. I have access to him. So, like, if I had like a pressing question, I could ask him that question. I got to interview him for New York Post after he interviewed me. Like, so I when you have access to these people, and it's not just like the notable people. Um, I had This sounds kind of weird to even bring up, but like, I had breakfast with a lobbyist. And he is someone who's written for the New York Post before, but he had decided to reach out to me. We had breakfast when he was passing through from New York to DC, and it was probably one of the more eye-opening conversations I had with him because I got to understand the perspective of a lobbyist. I had access to a lobbyist to understand his perspective and what his daily life is like, and what it's also he included me in what it's like for a congressman or a senator. Just yesterday, I just sat down with a former congresswoman, Nan Hayworth, from New York, and so I got to have access to her and sit down and ask her, what is it like to be a congresswoman? What do people misunderstand about being a congresswoman? And I gave her like my opinion, like what I've learned so far, and she agreed on some things and clarified from her perspective. I have access to a congresswoman, right? So it's that the level of access that we have being within the media allows for us to have an even more informed opinion. So it is beyond, and that's the part that's kind of like the disconnect. When you deal with people who are ideological, who are like just the average person who goes on Twitter and has some opinion, and then they want to criticize you, they don't understand that one, I'm a public figure now. And so when I say something, I realize that I have to say something that is truthful, or I'm going to get some sort of backlash. Well, assuming that I care, and I do care what I say. But the thing that I am saying is based on information that I know. Right? It's not about, oh, I read this article and I read that. It's like I've talked to some of these people. Recently I was talking to someone offline, and they overheard me having a discussion about Trump. And they were like, I've never heard somebody like break down, Trump in this particular way. And I'm like, and they were a little bit worried because they didn't know what was true, what's not true. I was like, listen, and the same thing we just talked about. Trump is basically an old school Democrat. Everything that he could have done extreme is this way. I know people who are part who know him. I know one of my really good friends. She knows Don Jr. So we're in this circle. We all know each other. These people aren't crazy. Like it's just like if they were, I wouldn't have voted for the guy. And
Right.
even more so because I have access to people who knows him and knows his motivations and things that he's trying to do. So I think that eye-opening thing is realizing how much information you can gain from having access, but also how much people don't realize how much information they don't know because they don't have access. Because if you do have access, then your viewpoints on stuff becomes far more informed, and your insinuations about stuff becomes less and less. Because you can either reach out to people, or based on certain things that this wouldn't be the case. Um, I think access, if I'm to really think about it, I think access has probably been the most eye-opening aspect of it.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great, man. I had a great conversation. We'll probably talk all afternoon, so I don't want to keep you all day. But
Oh, you
how can
said you had a couple more questions.
oh, yeah, I did. So let me ask you this. Is there any more books coming? Anything else you've been working on? Anything you're thinking about writing about?
It's a great question because I am in the middle of writing my second book.
Okay.
I'm not saying the title as of yet. It's one that was like later surprised, but I will tell you about it.
Okay.
Um, so the book is basically a cultural critique on childhood abandonment and parenting dynamics, basically.
Mhm.
So much of it is storytelling, um, talking about my childhood, what I experienced, but even more so, this is probably, I'm not an avid book reader, but I would imagine this is probably the only, or will be the only, cultural critique book that is child centered. I think that that's very important because it's not just from the adult side; it's from the child. I'm forcing people to see the perspective of the child and what they
Mhm.
might be thinking, feeling, what they're hearing, what the messages that they're being told. Um, I'm also talking about the things that you're probably not supposed to talk about or people avoid talking about. Like one of those things is there are parents who hate their children. Like that is a real thing. And I think good people never want to realize that there is hatred for a child that exists. Like we know, but we don't want to think about it, kind of thing. Like we know CPS exists, but they're not sitting on their thumbs all day, right? They're doing something because there are parents who don't care about their children, who use their children as punching bags. I have a chapter called Child Punching Bags, where we hit children and it's okay. We scream at children and it's all right. Um, within that chapter, I specifically talk about spanking, right? And that's the nice way of saying it. But you're abusing your child, right? It's just a socially acceptable form of abusing your child. And I'm telling people, imagine you're 3 foot tall, 2 foot tall, and you have someone who's 6 foot tall screaming and yelling at you. You have no choice of what's going on, and they grab a weapon like a belt or a broom and hit you with it because you didn't do the thing that you're supposed to do, and your brain's undeveloped, and you didn't mean to make a mistake, but people are just screaming at you, and this is your entrance to the world. Does that seem appropriate? And so people don't see it from that kid's perspective, and then we trick those kids who grow up in that environment, and and I'm sure you've seen this for many Black Americans. They romanticize spanking children. Like, I'll beat their ass. Like they
Hmm.
talk about it like with such reverence. And I've heard stories of people talking about because they're laughing through it because they think it's funny now because that's the only way to interpret it. Because if they were to really interpret it, they'd see like, wow, my parent was a monster.
Yeah.
They got in trouble at school. They knew that as soon as they get home, they were gonna get beaten. And they already felt bad and they're crying and they're talking about, oh man, I was crying. And they enter the house and they're being screamed at, told to get the weapon that they're going to be abused with so they can be abused. And even though they're screaming and crying, their sociopath parent says, I'll give you something to cry about. Like this is the environment that a lot of kids are growing up in. And then they grow up and think that it's normal. Why? Because when they're telling that story, their neighbor says the same thing. And their friend says, say, oh yeah, I went through that too. It just becomes this cultural norm. And then they say, if I didn't get my ass beat, I wouldn't be the person I am today. No, that's not it. That is rationalizing your parents' bad behavior because there are swaths of kids who don't get abused, who don't get beaten, and they turn out just fine. So why is the beating beneficial for you and not for the, like? And I tell within the book I tell a personal story, because I gotten spanked when I was a kid, but I always felt like I didn't need to get. I already felt bad enough for whatever. Like I knew I messed up. Yell at me, fine. Yell at me. All right, you know what? You're right. I messed up. Punish me. Take away something. Right. But you don't need to hit me with something. And so when I had my son, like they say, oh, you just pop a kid. They give you the miniature version of abusing a child. Just pop him. Just pop him. And so I would do that, and I didn't like it. And then I one day, like, I was thinking about, like, when I was a kid, I hated that. And now I'm doing this to my son. I love my son. And so just one day I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. I didn't tell him. I just told myself, I'm not going to hit him anymore. Not going to put my hands on him. And from that day on, I never put my hands on my son. Anytime something he did wrong, I would punish him. We would talk about it. If I was mad, I might raise my voice, but we would talk about it so he understand. And he was distraught enough because he disappointed his father. Because children have this innate want to please their parents. And you're disappointed, that's enough. You don't need to that's that's overkill. You don't need to now go grab my belt so I can beat you for 5 minutes. Like that but that's what parents are doing, and then the kids grow up, and I almost went down that direction. After, well, I was spanked, so why don't I spank my kid? And then they see an unruly child and they're like, well, the reason they're unruly is because they're not spanked. It's like, no, there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of reasons why that kid's not ruly. Um, but this is like one of those many things that I feel like is happening within our society where we don't understand the perspective of the child, and the adults get to act like children and expect the children to respond like adults. The adults get to divorce their parent, the divorce the other parent, chase love, uh, and then they say, "Oh, we'll give the kids some therapy and they'll be fine." And then they tell themselves the lie, "If I'm happy, they'll be happy," as if that's how
Hmm.
kids work. You know, Meanwhile, the kids are just supposed to respond like adults and say, "Yes, of course, my mother is happy, so I am fine. Yeah, oh, we're moving out of state, no problem. Okay, I'll handle that perfectly fine, even though I'm completely mentally undeveloped and I have no idea what's going on around me." Like this is this is how detrimental um, this is the type of detrimental world a lot of parents, and this crosses economic lines, it crosses racial lines. This is not even American, because I'm framing the book as a Western problem because it is. Um, since writing my first book, I've talked to so many people who live outside of America who have similar issues, especially in the UK, growing up in single parent homes, experiencing abuse, uh, community uh, issues where same thing we're talking about spanking, just like this is beyond American problem, but it is especially American problem where nearly a quarter of American children are growing up in separate homes from one of their parents. Um, and the last thing I'll bring up is probably the most taboo thing to bring up. Um, we don't see the nuclear family structure as a protective structure, right? We just see it as, well, the parents worked it out or they didn't work it out. And so you got to move apart and everybody's broken apart, right? So they see it as it's a choice of the adults of how they want to live rather than a structure that is also a part of protecting their child from something. And what is that something? Well, child molestation, sexual abuse, physical abuse from someone who is not their parent. And the statistics are absolutely astronomical as far as bringing someone or allowing someone access to the home who is a non biological figure, access to the child. The statistics are astronomically high as far as the likeliness of that child experiencing physical or sexual abuse of some fashion. Whereas if they had both of their parents in the home, that decreases, right? There is no mother who's seeking love and dating and, oh, I want you to meet my new boyfriend. Oh, he's going to be your new stepdaddy. There is none of that, right? Trying to figure out if this stranger is going to treat me like normal, or is this stranger actually a predator who is using my mother to gain access to me, right? These are real situations. One last thing I'll say is I did a podcast one time because I wrote an article for Newsweek talking about this very thing, and I did a podcast and it was same way I'm breaking it down for you. And after I was done, one of the hosts said, what you just stated was my childhood. That's exactly what happened to me." And the stories like that I've heard a bunch of times since becoming a public figure and talking to people about the importance of families. These children don't have the platform that I do. These children are afraid that if they criticize these things, they're going to criticize their one parent that cared about them. Right? They're afraid of talking about these things, and so they just keep it to themselves or get therapy. And no one cares. uh, like, we sort of know that these kids are being molested, but we don't want any further details or why it happened, or God forbid we want to take some sort of ownership of our part and inviting the monster into our homes. But these are real situations, and the children grow up to become adults and they have to deal with it. They have to deal with the consequences of bad decisions from the adults. So that's just like a snippet of the of the book, because there's so much. And if I can just make a quick reference to my thankfulness for God, and Him putting me in a certain direction. I've been going back and forth about what my next book was going to be about, and it just wasn't working. I I was trying to get set up with, and I'm not saying this is nothing disparaging against anybody. I'm actually glad it worked out the way that it worked out. I was getting connected with someone who's going to try and connect me with book publishers, but they were trying to sell it on as being like a memoir. I didn't really want to do a memoir. I want to do like a cultural critique, but maybe I could do it as a memoir and kind of do that. And it didn't work out. And one day on the couch, like it just hit me. And it was just like, you're supposed to do it this way. And the reasons why I was avoiding doing that is because I was chasing something I shouldn't chase. Right. I was like, oh, let me see if I can sell it to a publisher and make a bunch of money and I end up doing the thing I wanted to do anyways. It's like, no, that's not why you're here. That's not why you're here to do it. This is an important message. And if you happen to make money off of it, then so be it. But I'm supposed to do it the way that I'm supposed to do it for a reason. And I know that trying to go the traditional route and some bigger publisher, I know that it would get watered down or they would reject it. And I'm fighting an uphill battle or an impossible battle to have this message heard. But these particular topics, they're so difficult to talk about that having a mainstream publisher take these on is is not
Yeah.
likely whatsoever. But it is so necessary. And every time I talk to somebody about the subjects that are going to be coming up in this book. They're like, yes. And then they say, I know someone who's going through that. I know this person, my cousin, my nephew, my sister. I went through that. Like this, it's such a massive problem that people don't even realize how much of a massive problem it is because we don't talk to each other about it. And we just say, just move on. Just move on. You can't change the past, just move on. And it's like, but if we don't criticize it, then we don't actually change the future either. So, like, the only reason my son has a better future and a better life than I did is because I criticized my father's behavior and I actively worked against repeating what he did. And imagine if you never come across someone who's actually criticizing this very thing. There's so many things I've talked to my wife about. She's like, I never even thought about that. I'm like, yeah, that's like, this is exactly why. Like, it's like, even within our own family, it's just like, that's a major problem. And everybody's just like, oh, yeah, yeah, it's just a thing. It's like, it's a major problem. And she understands, so there's so it's so deep. I'll end it there.
Yeah, we definitely got to have you back on and talk about that because I hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's a fine line between disciplining your child and abuse. I mean, because I do believe that in the verse where it says you spare the rod, spoil the child, definitely believing that you need some type of, but that rod of discipline doesn't necessarily mean you go out and get a switch every time the child messes up. It's really how
right.
you balance that. Because a lot of times, you're right. A lot of times when parents discipline their children, they do it out of anger. And that's when it gets to the abuse.
Yes.
That's when they go rage and you really abuse the child instead of, like you said, just really having a conversation. Because and there are certain time frames too. Like when a child's very young, a quick tap or something like that could be something needed. But when your child's a teenager, don't go and get a belt or anything like that. Your child probably. I've done that with my son. I mean, look, my son's old enough. My son's a teenager. My daughter's a teenager. I have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. We don't whoop our
Hmm.
children. Our children are teenagers. This is when you talk to them, you take stuff away, but you're trying to build them up. Like you say, you're trying to build them up, encourage them to be functioning adults and make decisions that they want to make on their own to make intelligent, wise decisions. And when they don't, you give them the grace to fall back and say, you got a safe space here. Let's talk about what you did and how you can improve in the future. Because you're trying to create a person that's going to be functioning on their own in the future instead of fearful and taking those bad habits into their marriage, into their children, and
Yeah.
perpetuating those things. Because I have plenty of stories about friends. It's one of those things in the black community. You go out, get your switch, and then you bring the switch in, and you get whooped with it. I mean, it's one of those deals. So yeah, I definitely would want to have you back on so we can dive deep into that because that's a real deal. That's a real issue, especially like you said, when more than a quarter of children growing up don't have two parents in the home. The destruction of the biblical order, the nuclear family has led to so much dysfunction. I believe that's the reason why we have so much dysfunction here in America and in the Western society is because people think they're smarter than God. They really do. They really
Yeah.
do think they're smarter than God and they can do it themselves. And that's led to all the dysfunction and all the problem that we have here in America is that people truly abandon what has worked in the past for these new modern new age kind of philosophies and ideologies that's led to nothing but despair, and it's sad to see. So it's good that we start
Yeah.
to look at these things because it's important. Because I always say, I tell people, look, politics is kind of downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from faith. So if you have churches that are corrupt, you're gonna have a culture that's corrupt. You can have politicians in the political realm that's gonna be corrupt. So you have to change it at the core level, and that starts with families, and it starts with families being intact and going from there. So I think that's
Yeah.
yeah. I gotta have you back on so we can dig deep into that, because that's a topic that we can really go hours and spend because it's so real and people don't want to talk about it. And yeah, I can go deep because a lot of people don't want to talk about stuff. They really don't want to talk about stuff. They sweep it under the rug, and it goes from one generation to the next, and it never gets resolved. And it creates this monster of a problem that you see it, but people don't want to address it. So I think it's good and high
Yeah.
time that we do address it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that there is a massive issue when it comes to selfish and prideful parents. Because if you're selfish and you're prideful, likelihood of you changing your behavior is slim to none. Because you're already doing everything you decide to do is the best thing to do. And so I know that one of the as crazy as it sounds, criticizing spanking is like it's one of those things where you know you're going to get a ton of pushback because there's so many people who have well I was spanked, so you saying my mom was wrong for spanking me and I spanked you saying I'm wrong. That's pride, right? That's pride getting in the way of saying
Hmm.
like, oh, you mean two generations could actually be doing something wrong? Yes,
Right.
it's very possible that two generations
Right.
could be doing something wrong. I think we have to be willing to criticize these things and analyzing it and saying, is this conducive? But that's why I wanted to make it clear. This book is for it to be child centered,
Hmm.
right? Because we're not seeing it from the perspective. We're seeing it from the adult perspective, who's making the choice to spank, right? And as the adults, we can rationalize bad behavior all day long, right? I needed to do this thing because it's like no, it's clearly bad, but you'll rationalize it to death.
Right.
But what about the child? What about the child's perspective of looking up at the adult, literally and figuratively, watching them beat them, like, does that seem right? Does that seem right? Like, you're 2 foot tall, you don't know what's going on, you have no rights, right? Because children are the only group of Americans who have no full rights, right? You can't leave and go wherever you want. You have no money. You can't drive, right? So you can't run away from the abuse, like in the same way. So you're stuck there having someone who is 5 foot to 6 foot tall beating you because you made a mistake because children make mistakes and you're going to have to tell the child the same thing multiple times. Why? Because they haven't gotten through their head, because their brain's still developing, they
Right.
don't fully understand yet. And you have to give them grace, otherwise you look like the bully, right? And we wouldn't advocate beating mentally ill children. We wouldn't advocate beating children who are with Down syndrome because they didn't understand something. Like, you would understand that they have a handicap. Children have a mental handicap because they haven't finished developing their brains, and so you're going to have to repeat things. You're going to have to give them some sort of grace. Like, they're going to be foolish.
Right. Right.
It's this is normal. So it's not to say the opposite is to do nothing. And we're not advocating. People think if you don't spank your kids, you're saying do nothing. No, obviously you do things. You do things that work. You do things that matter to them. That's why you take away their stuff, right? That's why you yell at them, scare them. I'm
Hmm.
fine for I'm fine with that. Yell and scare your kid, right? Well, I never told my son that I would never hit him, but maybe he thought in his head, like, I don't know, is my dad going to lose his crap and hit me? I don't know. But you don't have to actually do it. You
Right.
really don't.
Right.
And I think, like you said before, it just becomes a mechanism of frustration. Like, especially, and this is the taboo thing to say, single mothers turn to it because I completely understand it's a failing position to be in. You're working all day, then you come home and your kids didn't clean up, they didn't do the thing, or they messed up on this, and you're frustrated because you don't have time, you're tired, you don't have time to sit down and talk to them. Well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You're like, get your ass in here, grab the belt, and just beat them, and just deal with the screaming so you can go to bed.
Right.
Right? It's that kind of shortcut to see if we can fix the problem. But let me tell you, there are lots of young men who end up in jail who've been spanked.
Yeah. Lots of young men up in jail, lots of young men. You're right, because it's right. It's more than just a spanking. It's what leads to that. And you're right, because growing up in a single
Right,
home myself, mom working two jobs, they are tired, they are frustrated, and so they do lash out because of that. And they're not lashing out because, I mean, there are children, like you say, that are hated by their parents, but a lot of parents are just tired. They're tired of the predicament that they're in. They're tired, don't have any help, and so that's what they do to squash it, to get a immediate resolution for a problem that doesn't have an immediate solution. So yeah,
right.
yeah.
Exactly.
Man, so definitely, yeah, yeah. When you publish that book, yeah, us get together and talk about it, because I can see us really going deep into that, and I think it'll be a valuable conversation for everybody, for sure, for sure. So so before we go, where can people find your work? I know you have a Substack. Yeah, plug everything, because you're in a lot of places. So where can people find your work?
Yeah, my Substack has become my hub of all the things that I'm doing. So definitely go there. You can go to adambcoleman.substack.com and become a subscriber on there. If you're on Twitter, I'm the most active on Twitter. It's at wrong_speak. If I write anything for different publications, I usually put it up in my Substack so people are aware. Like if I do a New York Post piece, I put it up on there. Um, but yeah, I feel like I feel like I have a bunch of jobs. I have different projects that I'm working on. Obviously, we have Wrong Speak. Definitely check out Wrong Speak Publishing. We have um, basically like a blogging type platform where it's mostly opinion, um, but it's thoughtful opinion, varying viewpoints that are allowed on there. We take submissions, so you can go on the website. It's www.wrongspeakpublishing.com. So you can check out and become a subscriber on there as well. So yeah, I guess I'm in a bunch of areas. We're just trying to advocate for people to be heard, to speak freely, and give them a chance, just like I was given a chance.
That's great. That's great. Appreciate it, Adam. I enjoyed it. I mean, the time flew by, but it was a great conversation. So we definitely got to do this again
Yeah,
soon.
man.
Take care.
Absolutely.
See ya.
Thank you.